So if, like me, you're an artist or a creator and you've been posting on social media for the past few years, mostly for your self-promotion, maybe you've noticed that your reach has dropped. You've grown this anxiety and frustration around posting on social media. Well, then this video might be for you. So let's be clear, I'm not here to tell you how to beat the algorithm. There's plenty of videos about this on the web. What I'm going to talk about, though, is the change that those platforms have put in place in the past few years and how it affects creators and artists and consumers and fans. And it gets quite dark. So I thought of doing this video after I opened up on one of my Instagram stories in which I talk about this vicious cycle I seem to get myself stuck in which I was never happy with the content I was creating, and 99% of it just ended up in the trash. It's also obviously affected my mental health in terms of, like, I was never happy with where I was at in my playing at that point, and it brings self-doubt and self-deprecation, which is very unhealthy at the long term. This is where I got really overwhelmed by the replies I got from quite a few of my followers who are objectively talented, successful artists, not just musicians, of course, but all types of musicians, creators, painters, and so on. That got me thinking, how many people out there are feeling this way? Is there an increase? And if so, what's causing it? So the first thing I did was inquire among my own following, and I made some polls, and this one basically confirms that most people now do in fact feel more scared about posting their content on social media than before. This one, on the other hand, also confirms that most globally their reach lowered. So I felt like I was onto something, and not just I found the causes, I mostly found the consequences. And this is where it hurts. So in this video, we are going to cover what's causing this, the consequences of it, and most importantly, does it actually matter? So this state of mind which caused this whole video to exist is not caused by the imposter syndrome. This is something well known, especially in the artistic world. We all know what it feels like. But what caused this anxiety and frustration towards the social media posts was more due to something exterior than something interior. It didn't feel quite the same as the imposter syndrome. During the research, I couldn't really find any term for it, so I'm just going to call this the ranked creator syndrome. So indeed, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this, but the algorithm on social media platforms has a massive shift over the past few years. And this shift is basically going from a following-based feed to a ranked-based feed, meaning that you now mostly see things that the algorithm thinks will keep your attention with, rather than showing you things of pages you decided to follow and therefore see more of. I challenge you, next time you go on social media, check your feed, see how many of those posts actually are from pages you follow and how many are suggested to you, but you don't actually follow those pages. And yes, it does include the little cute cat video. This is because the feed now will be based on things that the algorithm thinks will keep your attention and therefore will keep you on the app, instead of showing you things you chose to see more of by following a page, for example. And yes, this shift has a lot of consequences. Of course, the first consequence of this is what it was designed for. It is more addictive. And yes, it is clearly working. So I made another poll, but we know this is a global trend, is that clearly people spend more time on social media now than a few years ago, and very few spend less time. So they made an already addictive platform even more addictive. But it gets worse. The second consequence of this shift is the quality of content. This is from a creator's point of view. We used to create content for our following. People who would choose to follow us because they are interested, they get it, they like it, and they want more of what we like to create. Now we have to create content to compete against the whole platform's content, all competing for attention from people who don't know us and don't know what we have to offer. That means that the content has to be aimed to reach a wide audience and work with them and get their attention. This is the new purpose of the content creators have to create. And well, we all know well enough what type of content works at a wide audience to get them hooked. Well, first of all, it has to get a hook. It has to be visually interesting and perfect looking. And it is usually empty of sense, empty of something really educative, meaningful, deep in any kind of subject. It has to just be very broad, very basic, and very easily understood by a lot of people who don't know much about what you're talking about. Also, a lot of things that people like is things they know already. So covers work great for that reason. But a new artist releasing a new music on social media will be very, very difficult in comparison. This stops a lot of creators from creating content that for them is more genuine, matters, is really their expertise. As a consumer of content, I think this is probably the worst part here, because not just you're more addicted to these platforms, you now have poor content thrown at you. You're fed things that are there to distract you, not to inspire you. So the third consequence of this is that it kills the artist. Indeed, artists used to create content on these platforms for self-promotion. It's been over a decade that if you want to make it in the business, well, it is not reasonable to think that you would manage without any kind of social media presence at all. Even successful musicians now are kind of forced to do it by their labels, just because it is important to connect with your fan base, and these platforms were a wonderful tool for it until this shift, because now your followers won't be reached by your content if your content does not perform well outside of your following. If you don't believe me, let's do quick math. And I hate math, so I'll do it really, really quick. I've got 2 screenshots here from my reach. This is from a post that performed really well, and this is from a post that performed kind of standard. And we can see that the one that performs really well is mostly outside my following, and the one that is standard is mostly my following. So you'd think, well, maybe you have less but most of your followers have been reached. And that's where you'd be wrong. So on the good performing ones, I had 17.5k views. And 70% of those were non-followers, so 30% of those were my followers. 30% of 17.5k is 5,100 followers. So that means over 5,000 of my 24.4k followers saw that post. So now on the standard performing post, we can see that it was 3.5k and 66% of those were my followers. So 66% of 3.5 is only 2.3 thousand followers. So this means that if it doesn't perform well outside, then less of my followers will see the posts. And this is my whole point. Creators now can't really reach their fan base as much as before, and that means if they have something like an event or a new product or a side project or something like this, well, it's going to be much harder for them to tell their fans who are genuinely interested in what they have to say. The repercussion of this is that creators slowly get themselves stuck and enslaved to what the algorithm wants from them. They will aim for reach and slowly forget what was the first purpose of sharing the content in the first place. And actually successful YouTubers or Instagrammers or even TikTokers nowadays slowly, I feel, become gimmicks of themselves. They just kind of cut everything that was a little bit meaningful about their content and just go for what performs really well, and it's very sad. So the fourth consequence, and the last I found, is the reign of the fake. Having to create content that has to compete against the content of an entire platform, in which perfection and extreme performances seem to be a massive selling point for going viral and increasing your reach. Well, cheating seems tempting and the rewards can be big. So more and more creators just don't hesitate now to use tools such as filters, but also edits and quantizing and pitch correct and so on, and modify basically in a way or another the performance for it to look and sound better than it actually is and does. This results in two things. Firstly is the expectation most people now have outside of those social media platforms from musicians and artists. Everyone expects perfection within and outside of those platforms. It just changes our standards altogether and expects perfection on a daily basis. But the second one is the discouragement and self-deprecation of artists who create content that is not modified, and they feel like maybe they're not good enough and they can't compete, and the self-doubt and mental health of those artists can of course be affected massively by this. So now the conclusion. Now that we know why this is happening, the consequences it has both on consumers but mostly on creators, well, let's see if there's anything we can do about it and if there's anything we should maybe do about it. So let's be clear. If your goal as a creator is to create content and become famous within these platforms and performing in your bedroom all day long and just share that, and that would make you very happy, then there's loads of videos out there that will help you to satisfy the algorithm and improve your reach. There's plenty of great tools out there for it. However, if like me, you're an artist who use these platforms for self-promotion and showcase your craft, maybe inspire, educate, then I think it is absolutely crucial that you do not forget why you are posting in the first place. And do not fall for the algorithm trap and this pursuit for reach that might not mean this much, because you might actually have reach of people who don't care about really what you're really good at, what you really want to share, what you really want to showcase. Use the algorithm. Don't let the algorithm use you. I think as an artist, it is our duty to keep art as truthful and as genuine as possible at all time. And I don't think it should be dictated by anything but ourselves and how we have the vision of this art. And especially not dictated by an algorithm of apps that are just not good for your mental health anyway. Remember that art is about creating something that is part of you, part of your soul, and it should be designed to challenge, to touch people, for self-growth, for reflection. By creating art dictated by an algorithm for an algorithm, it destroyed the essence of art itself and the why you started your craft in the first place. How can you challenge anything if you just try to please an algorithm of all things? Okay, so lastly, there are alternatives to social media. If you want to build a community, a fan base, and reach them, there are now more and more alternatives to social media. The most obvious one I can think of is Patreon, and that's the reason why I created my Patreon. This is a platform that is changing more and more to actually kind of help the creators compensate for what they're lacking now with the social media, with the shift I've just explained. And I think that's quite brilliant. I created my page not long ago, even though it's been years and years that I thought maybe I didn't really need it. But I'm very, very excited of this community and real conversation with your fan base, which now is almost impossible on social media. That's not the only one though. You can also have newsletters, and there's Bandcamps, and there's plenty of other alternatives out there, which I think is worth doing some research for and see which option would be best for you and what you create and how you create it and how you want to monetize it, and if it's just to reach out to fans and so on. So I hope you found this interesting, and maybe it has inspired you to change the way you do things, or maybe just actually inspired you to post and to create, most importantly. And thank you for watching.